I bought a new dress and didn't eat anything past noon, and he still stood me up for 3 hours. I want to be clear about that part. I want you to understand exactly what that evening cost me before I tell you what happened next. The dress was a deep burgundy wrap that I'd found at a boutique on Queen Street West. The kind of place where you feel slightly embarrassed checking the price tag. I'd had my nails done. I'd taken a cab instead of the subway so I wouldn't arrive sweaty. I had told my coworker Lena that I was finally meeting someone worthwhile, and she had given me a look that said she hoped it was true. My ex-fiancé had proposed to me on a Tuesday in our kitchen, and then 6 months later he told me he wasn't ready, while standing in the same kitchen, eating my leftovers. I had spent the year after that convincing myself I was fine, and not dating, and then convincing myself I should be dating, and eventually, after my cousin talked me into downloading 3 different apps in one sitting, I matched with someone who wrote in full sentences and seemed to hold opinions about things other than hockey standings. We'd been texting for 3 weeks. He seemed smart. He seemed warm. He had called instead of texting once, which felt almost archaeological in its rarity. He chose a steakhouse in the financial district, one of those places with dark wood paneling and leather banquettes and a maitre d' who pronounces things in a way that makes you feel slightly underdressed no matter what you're wearing. I arrived at 7 on the dot, was seated, ordered us a sparkling water, and waited. At 7:20 I texted him. The kind designed to look unbothered. He left it on red. At 8 I ordered bread, which I ate slowly to have something to do with my hands. At 8:40 I was considering whether it would be more dignified to cry in the bathroom before leaving or simply leave without crying, when a man sat down across from me. Not the man I had been waiting for. Not anyone I had ever seen before. He was broad-shouldered and dark-eyed and wore a suit that had not come off any rack. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older. There was a stillness to him that had nothing to do with calm. It was the stillness of someone who doesn't move because they don't need to. His hands rested flat on the table. He looked at me the way people look at paintings they're trying to appraise. "You're the forensic accountant," he said. It wasn't a question. I blinked. "I'm a regional operations manager for a logistics firm." He didn't react. "You were sent by Whitmore." I was sent by nobody. I've been sitting here for almost 2 hours waiting for a man who clearly isn't coming. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I don't know who you are, but I'd like to finish my water and leave, so if you could, what's your name?" That's not something I'm going to tell a stranger who sits down uninvited. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, more like recalibration. He looked around the restaurant briefly, and I noticed, for the first time, that 2 of the men near the entrance were not dining. They were watching. They were watching him. "My apologies," he said, and he stood. "I made a mistake. Enjoy your evening." He walked back toward the private dining area, without looking over his shoulder. I sat there for a moment. I drank the last of my water. I thought about how none of this was what I had planned when I got dressed that afternoon. And then I picked up my coat and my bag and walked out. I got about half a block. He was standing beside a black SUV, speaking quietly with one of the men from the restaurant. He looked up when I came through the door. I don't know why I stopped. I don't know what I thought I was going to say. "The man who stood me up tonight," I said. "His name is Trevor Colquhoun. He works in commercial real estate. I don't know if that's useful to anyone." He looked at me for a long moment. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because I've had a terrible evening and I would like at least one person to know his name before I go home." A pause. Then something moved across his face that was the closest thing to a smile I would see from him for a long time. "I'm Marcus Vieira," he said. I told him my name was Annette. He nodded once. "Annette, go home, get some sleep." I went home. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and told myself the whole thing was strange and forgettable and nothing. By 2 in the morning, I had half convinced myself. Then at 9 the next morning, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and my entire life turned sideways. My coworker Lena was standing at my desk when I got off the call, holding 2 coffees and one expression of sustained alarm. I must have looked the way I felt, which was as though the floor had moved slightly beneath my feet and not yet moved back. "Annette," she said carefully. "What happened?" "There is apparently a federal investigation into the logistics company we work for," I said. "And someone has flagged me as a person of interest because of something to do with the Toronto office accounts from 2022. Lena set both coffees down. "You've been here since 2023. I know that. The investigator knows that. The issue is that someone signed documents with a name very close to mine and nobody caught it until now." I pressed my fingers to my forehead. "This is fine. I haven't done anything. They just want to speak to me formally." Should you get a lawyer? I thought about the man from the restaurant. I thought, for some reason, about the way he'd said forensic accountant, like he'd been expecting one. Like someone had told him to expect one. I didn't call a lawyer that day. I should have. Instead, I went home and I sat in my kitchen and I opened my laptop and I typed the name Marcus Vieira into a search engine, the way you press on a bruise, slowly, half hoping it won't hurt. It hurt, not because of anything criminal, not specifically. He wasn't on any list I could find. But he was attached to enough companies, enough real estate developments, enough quiet investment vehicles, and holding corporations with bland names that suggested machinery designed to remain invisible, that I understood what the stillness was. I understood what those men at the restaurant door were for. I closed the laptop. I made tea. I thought about how my mother had always said I was a magnet for complicated situations, and I thought about how she was almost certainly right, and then I thought about how she would absolutely never hear about this. I had, as it turned out, approximately 72 hours of believing this was all coincidence before a town car pulled up outside my building on a Thursday evening, and the driver stepped out and handed me an envelope with my name on it in neat handwriting. Inside was a business card and a note. The note said, "I think we have a mutual problem. Come speak with me if you'd like help with it. If not, keep the card anyway." The card had a phone number and no other information. I called him 2 days later. I want to say I deliberated. I want to say I was cautious. I was neither of those things. I called him on a Saturday morning while I was still in my pajamas and I said, when he answered, "What do you know about the investigation into my company?" "Enough," he said. "How?" "Because I'm the reason there is one." I sat down on my kitchen floor, not on a chair, the floor. "What does that mean?" "It means that someone at your company has been laundering money through freight invoices for the last 4 years. And I discovered it because that money was coming from people who owe me a significant debt. And I don't appreciate being stolen from sideways." He paused. "Your name appeared on documentation that isn't yours. Someone used it as a placeholder. You were, as far as I can tell, entirely uninvolved, but investigators don't always start with that assumption." "I see," I said, which was not entirely accurate because I could not fully see, but I was trying. "I can make certain things clearer to the people conducting the investigation. I have access to documentation they don't currently have access to." Another pause. "I wanted to offer that, given that I seem to have inadvertently made your situation more complicated by starting the investigation." "Yes." I thought about this. I thought about the $860 my dress had cost me. I thought about my ex-fiancé eating my leftovers in the kitchen. I thought about what my life looked like and how tired I was of having things happen to me without my permission. "I don't want you to fix it," I said. "I want you to give me what you have. I want to take it to a lawyer myself and handle it myself." A silence. Longer than his previous ones. "That's not the usual request. I'm not asking you to do me a favor. I'm asking you to share information that you apparently have about a situation that involves me." "Those are different things." "They are," he agreed. And then, after a moment, "You can come to my office Monday morning. I'll have copies of everything." I went. I brought a lawyer. He didn't seem surprised that I'd brought a lawyer. If anything, he seemed to find it reasonable, and he shook my lawyer's hand first, which I noticed. We sat in a boardroom on the 34th floor of a building on Bay Street, with a view of the lake that I would have stopped to appreciate under any other circumstances. He laid out files, real files, paper organized. He explained, without drama or editorializing, how the money had moved, whose names were actually on what, and where the genuine documentation diverged from the fraudulent documentation. My lawyer took notes. I took notes. Marcus Vieira drank coffee and answered questions, and did not once make me feel that he was doing me a favor, which was. I realized later, walking out into the October afternoon with my coat unbuttoned, because I'd forgotten to button it. The most surprising thing about the entire meeting. "You didn't have to come," he said, at the elevator. He'd walked us out, which I hadn't expected. "You didn't have to offer," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "Trevor Colhoun, by the way. Commercial real estate. Turns out he knows one of my associates. Small city. I hope his evening was as unpleasant as mine." "Unpleasanter," he said, considerably. I didn't ask what that meant. I decided I didn't need to know. The investigation wrapped in 6 weeks. My name was removed from the persons of interest list after the first week once the documentation was properly examined. My lawyer told me I had been lucky. I thought lucky was an interesting word for it. I ran into him again in November. Genuinely ran into him. I was coming out of a coffee shop on King Street, and he was walking past, and we almost collided, and I spilled approximately half my oat milk latte on his sleeve, and he looked down at it, and then looked at me with an expression I still cannot fully categorize. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it in a way that exceeded the coffee. "Don't be," he said. "Are you all right?" I had not been asked that recently. Certainly not by anyone impressive, certainly not while standing on a sidewalk in November while it started to spit rain. "Mostly," I said. He held the door open. We went back inside. We sat at a small table by the window for 40 minutes. And talked. Not about investigations or companies or favors, about the city, about where we were from, about what it meant to have built something from nothing in a place that expects you to arrive already formed. He had grown up in Hamilton. I had grown up in Brampton. These are not glamorous origins, and we both seemed to know it, and we both seemed somehow to think it was funny. When we left, he flagged a cab for me even though I had said I was taking the subway and I didn't correct him. I just got in. My mother called that evening. She asked about my love life the way other mothers ask about health concerns, constantly, with a vague underlying alarm. I told her I was fine. I told her I'd had a good day. I told her nothing about the coffee, nothing about the 40 minutes, nothing about the way I'd thought about his hands on the table, and how they were still again, in the same way as before, except now it didn't feel like danger. I don't know what it felt like. I didn't examine it. He texted me 3 days later. My number was on the lawyer's paperwork, which is the kind of thing I told myself to explain why he had it. And I told myself that explanation and I mostly believed it. The text said, "There's an opening at the Harborfront Center on Friday. I have 2 tickets that were given to me and I have no one to give the second one to. Would you want it?" I read it 4 times. I noticed the lack of a question mark, which was either a typo or a personality trait. I noticed that he had phrased it as being about the ticket rather than about me, which was either considerate or evasive, and I genuinely could not tell which. I texted back, "Is this how you normally invite people to things?" He replied, "No, I don't normally invite people to things." I went to the opening. I wore a different dress, navy blue, less expensive, more comfortable. He was already there when I arrived. He was talking to someone and stopped when he saw me, mid-sentence, which the other person noticed and I pretended not to. We walked around the exhibition. We talked about the work, some of it I liked, some of it I didn't, and I said both things honestly instead of being diplomatic, and he appeared to find this more interesting than diplomacy. He had opinions, strong ones, about some of the pieces. He didn't perform the opinions, he just had them. Near the end of the evening he said, without particular lead-up, "I'd like to see you again, if you'd like to." I looked at him. I thought about what I knew about him, which was not small. I thought about what I didn't know, which was considerably larger. I thought about a boardroom on the 34th floor, and a note delivered to my door, and a man who had shared documentation with me, and not asked for anything in return, except that I sit across from him in a restaurant, and tell him my name was Annette. "You know my actual name," I said. "I do." "And you waited." A pause. "You told me when you were ready." I thought about that. "I'd like to see you again," I said. We went for dinner the following week, and the week after that. And then it was January, and I was calling him from my car after bad days at work, and he was picking me up from the airport when I came back from a work trip to Montreal, even though I had not asked him to. And one evening, I was at his condo on the lake, and his phone kept buzzing with something I could see he was managing carefully, and I said, looking at the ceiling, "I don't need to know everything, but I need to know enough to know what I'm a part of." He put the phone down. He sat across from me, and he told me enough. Not everything. I don't know if there is an everything, or if everything would even be useful, but enough, where money came from, what debts existed, and to whom, what he had walked away from and what he had not. It was not a comfortable conversation, and I didn't try to make it comfortable, and he didn't either. When he was done, I said thank you. He looked slightly thrown by that. For what? For not trying to make it sound smaller than it is. He was quiet for a moment. "I assumed you'd leave." "I might still," I said. "I haven't decided." He nodded. He didn't push. That was when I understood something important, that whatever he was, he had never once tried to make a decision for me. He had opened doors and waited to see if I walked through them. Every time. I stayed that evening. I went home in the morning. I called my cousin and I told her I had met someone, and she asked me 17 questions in rapid succession and I answered most of them honestly, and some of them I said I don't know yet, and a few I said I'm figuring out, and she said, at the end, "Are you happy?" I thought about it. Seriously. The way I try to think about serious things. I thought about the dress in the restaurant and how that evening had cost me more than I'd planned and delivered nothing I'd expected. I'm something, I said. I think it's close. She said that was the most hopeful she'd heard me sound in 2 years. My mother found out about him, the way my mother finds out about everything. My cousin told my aunt. My aunt saw my mother at Sobeys on a Saturday. And by Sunday evening, I had a missed call and a voicemail that was 6 minutes long and concerned entirely with why I hadn't mentioned any of this. I called her back. She asked the age question and the job question, and then she asked a question that surprised me, which was, does he treat you like you matter? I thought about a boardroom. I thought about files organized in advance. I thought about an airport at 8 in the evening and a cab flagged in the rain and a text without a question mark. Yes, I said, he does. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, we'll bring him for dinner sometime. Not yet. I need to think about what to cook. He met my family in March. He brought wine, and he asked my uncle questions about the work he did. And he helped clear the table without being asked. And my mother walked me into the kitchen afterward, under the pretense of getting more dessert, and whispered, with a precision that suggested she had been preparing the sentence, he looks at you like he's paying attention. I knew what she meant. It was the thing I had felt from the beginning and hadn't been able to name. Like every time I spoke, he was actually listening. Like I was not ambient. Like I was specific. We went home that night, and I told him what she'd said, and he was quiet for a while, and then he said, your family is loud, I know, I liked it. I looked at him. You're not used to that. No, he said, not particularly. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. I knew by then enough of the shape of his childhood to understand what he meant. And I didn't push, because he had never pushed me. And that is the kind of thing you learn from someone when you're paying attention. He asked me to move in with him in April. I said not yet. He said okay. I moved in August, because I had decided by then, and when I decide something I tend to stop waiting to do it. My mother cried a little when I brought the last boxes over. Not sad tears, the kind that come when you've been worried about someone for a long time and something finally shifts. She stood in my empty bedroom and looked at the walls where my things had been, and she said, you know you can always come back. I know, I said, and you know this is what I wanted for you. I put my arm around her. I know that too. Standing in that doorway, I thought about a Tuesday in a kitchen that wasn't mine anymore and a man who ate my leftovers while telling me he wasn't ready. I thought about how much of the last 2 years I'd spent being careful, being small, making myself easy to keep and easy to leave. I thought about a restaurant and 2 hours and a burgundy wrap dress and a stranger who had said I made a mistake and apologized and walked away. And I thought about how sometimes the things that cost you the most at the time are the ones that lead somewhere you couldn't have planned. I don't know what the next years look like. I don't think I'm supposed to. I think you get, if you're lucky, someone who holds the door and waits for you to decide. Someone who shares what they have and doesn't ask you to be grateful. Someone who, when you say I haven't decided yet, says okay and means it. My cousin says I got lucky. My mother says I got what I deserved, which she means as a compliment. I think maybe I just finally stayed in the room long enough to find out what was actually there.